Welcome to all of our attendees right now. We are about 10 minutes out from the presentation, so I welcome you to the session and thank you for waiting. We'll be beginning shortly. Good morning to all of our attendees again. I thank you for waiting. We're going to get started in a few minutes. We're just going to wait till we're going to get started at about 12:03 just to give everybody a chance to get in the room. Just so you know, we will be monitoring the Q&A box for questions, and we will have two links provided in the chat box. One will be the CDPA website, which will have a schedule for future webinars, and also the New York Upstate Planning Conference link will also be posted in the chat box. Here you can see all of our recorded sessions. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending a data-forward approach to hazard mitigation planning of the APA New York Upstate Chapter 2020 virtual conference. My name is Nick Shupp. My colleague, Sandy Meisowitz, and I will be your hosts for this session. The scene credit number for this session is 9205106. That's 9205106. Before we get started, we would like to thank our sponsor for this session, Planning for Places. Without our sponsors, this virtual conference would not be possible. I'd like to let you all know that our sessions are being recorded and will be available online through the New York Upstate Chapter's website. The link will be provided in the chat box below, and the videos will become available when they are posted. As you notice, all attendees are automatically muted. If you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A box. We will address all questions after the session has been concluded. I would like to introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker will be Catherine Lawson. Dr. Lawson is an associate professor of urban planning in the Geography and Planning Department at the University at Albany. She's the director of the Albany Visualization and Informatics Laboratory, also known as AVAIL, and the PI for the state and local hazard mitigation plan research projects. We then have Adam Toby. Mr. Toby is a project manager and research specialist at AVAIL. He has a master's degree in urban and regional planning from the University at Albany. We then had Erica Corsi. Ms. Corsi is a project manager and research specialist at AVAIL as well, and a master's in urban and regional planning candidate at the University at Albany. Eric Kranz, we then have Mr. Kranz, the project manager and graphic artist at AVAIL. He's supervising a number of applied data science research projects. I will now turn the presentation over to Adam Toby. Adam, whenever you're ready, you can share your screen.
Great, thank you, Nick. All right. So thank you everybody for coming today. We are the Albany Visualization and Informatics Labs at the State University of New York at Albany. So just to give you a little bit of idea of what we do, we take various sources of typically publicly accessible data, and we create digital web-based tools to visualize it. The tools we develop are designed to be open source and extensible to ensure that they remain accessible and can adapt as necessary to a changing field. Now our director, Dr. Catherine Lawson's close ties to SUNY Albany's Master of Regional Planning program inspires a lot of effort on researching best practices and catering our tools to planning practitioners in the field. Today, we're going to be talking a bit about our hazard mitigation planning projects and some of our efforts to create a dynamic plan that integrates data. Next slide, please. So I think it's important to start off with a bit of an explanation of what hazard mitigation planning is, why it's important, and how it's accomplished for anybody who's not too familiar with that. It's the process of reducing the impacts of hazards through strategy, action, and regulatory development. In most hazard mitigation planning processes, ours included, this specifically refers to natural disasters like floods, fires, and tornadoes. Often human-made disasters are covered in separate hazard mitigation plans. So natural disasters are an inherently stressful situation, and having a fully developed plan for understanding your community's capabilities and assets and how your community can handle the impacts would take an otherwise chaotic situation and give it somewhat of an organized fashion to approach it in. Next slide, please. So there are quite a few sources on hazard mitigation planning, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, has done an excellent job at compiling some of the best practices in their documentation. The typical method of planning for hazards is to start by developing a planning team or committee that will be spearheading the process. That committee or planning team will be responsible for administering, reaching out, and organizing different stakeholders in the process, as well as establishing the clear goals and objectives for the process. The next step is to conduct a capability assessment. Since natural disasters are usually only an issue when they impact human settlement, it's important to inventory all of the jurisdiction's physical assets, structures, and critical facilities. It is crucial to understand that the different mechanisms each community has at their disposal to respond to a hazard. Once the community has defined the resources that they have, they need to identify the risks they face. So using historic hazard data, various types of environmental studies, any anecdotal evidence that can be gleaned from community members or representatives, communities can then determine the hazards that could impact them. After priority hazards have been identified, they need to be analyzed to determine what impacts they could have on the resources that were identified in the capability assessment and the vulnerable populations of the area. Finally, from the planning process, mitigation actions need to be developed that take the goals and objectives of the community into consideration. These actions should be generated by the local community and be informed by the planning process. Thank you. So this is a graphic. If you're familiar with hazard mitigation at all, you've seen a very similar instance of this graphic, but it's a representation of where mitigation plays its role in the planning process. And it's all of it. It's through the whole disaster cycle. It's an iterative process that should be developed at all stages of the disaster. And the hazard mitigation planning process occurs mainly during the preparedness stage, and it's most concerned with how to lessen the impacts through proper planning, but it also has to take into account all of the other stages of the disaster cycle. So hazard mitigation plans can be used as a centralized hub for planning in a community because they already take all of the other plans into account, and they require an extensive inventory of the assets within a community through a lens of risk reduction. Additionally, for a community to be eligible for disaster funding through FEMA, a hazard mitigation plan must be updated every 5 years. With the funding potential, communities are much more inclined to participate and develop these plans. So updating a hazard mitigation plan comprehensively can take extraordinary effort. AVAIL has created a digitized New York State hazard mitigation plan in an effort to serve as a foundation of information with centralized and accessible data for local planning. Data can be integrated through the use of APIs that will update as the source data updates. A web-based style of plan can be continuously updated and have the same format for each community across the state. The tools within the plan also put locals a few steps ahead in the planning process right out of the gate. So aside from creating some standardization through data science and visualization, we're also providing real utility for the locals and allowing communities to reallocate their resources towards other facets of the hazard mitigation planning process, like outreach, local analysis, integration, and ultimately implementation. Now, the standardization of all of these local plans creates an opportunity for more succinct vertical harmonization. So vertical harmonization would be the synchronization of plan components through different levels of government. The federal, state, county, and some municipalities all would have, or all do currently have, different hazard mitigation plans, and they're all formatted slightly differently, sometimes substantially. Our plans can be digitally integrated with one another, feeding data up and down the different levels of government. So broader data sets provided at the federal and state levels can help guide some of the mitigation strategies and inform some of the mitigation strategies for local communities. At the same time that individual data entries from each of the municipalities can feed back up to state and federal plans, and they can be aggregated to better inform county, state, and federal entities about regional capabilities. So with a little bit of introduction into what we're talking about, we've have the state plan complete, and we've moved into the development of local plans. So I'll turn it over to let Erica take it away and tell everybody a little bit more about some of our local hazard mitigation plans.
So what I'll be showing today is the tools that we have been developing at AVAIL over the last couple of months. This is a publicly available web-based hazard mitigation plan platform. It involves innovating planning tools, provides data at your fingertips. You can track your mitigation strategies, and it provides a lot of visualizations for risk, any development zones, open spaces that we can, the data that we can access. So with that being said, we're going to switch over to the actual website that we are working with. And what we'll be showing today is the web tool for Sullivan County. I'm going to show you what the front end of the tool looks like so you can get a sense of what the public sees. And I will also be showing the back end of the tools, which is where we put in and enter all of the data that translates to the front end. So what you're looking at is just the home page, provides you a brief overview of Sullivan County's any risks and strategies, so goals and objectives, local context, who's involved in the planning team. What's great about the tool is you can click the drop down and choose your specific jurisdiction, and the information presented on the page will change to match whatever jurisdiction you are looking to review. Next, we'll go to the planning process page. This page is all about the planning process, who was involved, the outreach strategies that we implemented to get those people involved, any existing resources that we can utilize to update the plan, any technical data. This page really provides you with the ins and outs of the planning process and how we got to the update status. Next, we're going to look at the hazards page. This is the hazard. These hazards are all FEMA designated natural hazards. Obviously, some of them correspond very well with New York State, others do not, but we like to list them all here. What's nice about this page is it provides you a local context beneath, so you'll get a local context of hazards within the county, and you can click through these hazards and the information on the page will change relating to whatever hazard you have chosen. Next, we'll look at the risk page. The risk page is all about your vulnerabilities, changes in risk, any floodplain management, so NFIP compliances, statistics and problems. Here we took excuse me, here we took information from previous plans and information gathered during our interviews with the county to really solidify the areas that we needed to focus on. So critical infrastructures and problem areas were a big topic during our interviews. Next, we'll go to the strategies page, and strategies is will provide you with your capabilities, implementing the plan, and any response to the plan. Capabilities are any planning and regulatory, administrative, technical, educational, outreach, and financial assets that the county and or jurisdictions will have. We like to look at those and integrate them into the hazard mitigation plan. And this page is where you'll find all local orientation, any resources that we could find to help with updating the plan. So this is the public page. Anybody can look at this information, but what we really like to focus on is the back end of the tools, because this is where the data is entered. You'll see on the side nav here, we have different tabs: home, plan, forms, storm events, capabilities, assets, and municipalities. What's nice is this is where we entered in all of the information about our local hazards. You can choose which hazard of information you'd like to enter and provide a narrative based on the conversations we had and interviews that we held. What's also nice is we have an actions form, and the actions form is where we put in problem statements and actions from previous plans that have been carried over, or they have been discontinued, or they're new. And this is where we really hammer out the areas that we would like to, that, we need to focus on within the mitigation plans. And all of this information here translates back into the front end of the tools, or the public facing page. It's important that we obtain, information based on the municipalities. So whether they're climate smart communities, in the community rating systems, NFIPs, where they stand, if they're in good standing. So this information is again what brings you all of the graphics and the maps on the front end. So this is really the main focus of the tool. And with that being said, we're going to move into what we call the scenario mapper. And the scenario mapper is an interactive portion of our tool that provides us the opportunity to identify problem areas, areas of concern. And I'm going to switch it over now to Eric Kranz, and he will discuss more about the scenario mapping tools.
Thank you, Erica. And please let me know if you can see my screen. Oops, had that open on the wrong page. Let's see here. So let's see. So sullivan.mitigateny.org. So sorry about that. My computer was not set up as I thought it was. So we're looking at this. So the back end of this tool suite, and I just want to bring it back to some of the stuff that Adam was saying as well at the beginning, is that one of the things that we are doing here is connecting data that we've been able to process at the state level down for the counties. And so one of the things that we did at the end of the 2018 update to the State Hazard Mitigation Plan was we began a process of pulling together an entire database of built footprints of structures in the state. There's a couple of parallel projects going on around the country, or there's some private companies that are doing this, and then I know of another, like a DEC funded program from the Columbia University Season program to do this as well. But we started doing it as part of what we had to do for the State Hazard Mitigation Plan, was to provide a state-owned asset inventory. And we started to realize that it actually makes more sense to do this at the for the entire state for all of the buildings than it did to just do it for the state-owned assets, because at the time Bing put out, or Microsoft put out a data set of building footprints, combining that with the OpenStreetMap building footprints, we were able to make most coverage of New York State. It's not perfect. During our mitigation planning process, we've uncovered a handful of places where our building footprints are not accurate, or like there's a building that's supposed to be there that's not there, or a building that's no longer there, that's been demolished or removed, that's still in the building footprint data set. And this probably will be a problem, going forward. It's the type of thing that needs to be updated fairly regularly. But what we also did was we combined that data with the parcel data for New York State. So we, New York State, I'm sure everybody knows, has been releasing the tax parcel information and more regularly, updating it and providing it for more counties. I believe the last county to provide it was Suffolk, and it did so last year, is my understanding. So we know what the parcel information is. Land use information is in the parcel data set. Replacement cost is in the parcel data set. Ownership information, there's a bunch of different things that are located in that parcel information. And actually, let me just turn on the land use version of this map so you can see what we have, right? So So this is now showing our parcel information, right? And the different colors that we can see down here on the right side of the screen show our land use types. We have commercial, industrial, vacant land, agricultural, et cetera. We can also show ownership type. Right now we're showing it as land use type, but we can flip the script here a little bit and just see what kind of, private is obviously the highest amount here, but we have this over here, which is signaling public school district, et cetera. So we have all this information, but then what we did was we intersected the building footprint data so that we could then apply the floodplain mapping to that, right? So if what we're doing is doing an exposure methodology, and I'll talk about like a couple of methodologies here, but the first one, when you run it across the FEMA DFIRM, the digital flood insurance rate maps, which you see here on the right. So this blue here is signifying the DFIRM area, and we can look at the 100-year floodplain, or we can look at the 500-year floodplain. Are folks seeing my screen? Just double checking.
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, beautiful. So we can see the 500-year floodplain, or the 100-year. Again, that's 0.2% and 1%. This is doing an exposure mapping, right? So this building is in the floodplain, and it's all in the floodplain. So this is fully exposed to the floodplain. And so we're saying that the loss associated with this would be a 500-year loss of $5.65 million, right? And so you can see that on the little mouse tip hover that I have here. And so this is one form of how we can do sort of an asset risk assessment. But we also have the capacity to enter in other kinds of hydrological studies that allow us to do a little bit more in depth. So I also have, we did HAZUS default scenarios, and these are, I believe they're 30-meter DEMS, and then they have depth as well. So then we can run these through a depth damage curve, which is the United States Army Corps of Engineers methodology for determining flood loss for structures. And that depth damage curve information is a typical HAZUS model run. So like when you're doing, if any folks who have done HAZUS, it's the FEMA hazard risk assessment tool. It comes stocked with building types by block group. So it's not being as accurate as this unless you preload your own buildings. And then it uses those hydrological depth damage curves. So again, if basically these depth damage curves show loss based on the depth of the water. So if it's a 1-foot flood, it's a building would be multiplied by a certain amount of money, a certain multiplier to show how much money dollar value loss would be associated with that building. If it's 3 feet, that the curve goes up, there's more loss associated with that building, et cetera. So we did some trial HAZUS default runs. In the county of Delaware, they actually provided us with local flood assessment hydrological model for the town of Andes, and that's even more accurate. Let me see if I can get that up and running for you real quick, just to show you how more accurate that can look. So in Delaware County, which is another one of the communities we're working in right now, we can take a look here at the Andes town hydrology. So right in here, and you can, when we take a closer look, you can see just how much the depth is in this study. So this is a capacity we have in the tool. It's not something that somebody can just upload. It has to kind of come through our software programming side in order to upload all this stuff. But we have the capacity here to do some really interesting stuff that the soil and water folks from Delaware County were very interested in, and they're going to try to get us these raster files to bring into their planning process going forward. But But this is all, you know, one piece of the puzzle, right? We have the capacity to show. Let's see if I can turn these off here. So beautiful. Let's get less stuff on here if I can. Well, I'm gonna have to restart that. Bugs in the software. It doesn't want to let me turn off the parcel data. Here, let's zoom into our never sink area for fun. This is a place where there's a community that's in the floodplain of the never sink reservoir. But so one of the things that this tool allows us to do is work in the middle of a meeting, which we use on a regular basis. So during our interview process with our communities, we were jumping in here and we were literally taking notes, so. So I know for a fact that this place is a vulnerable population, right? These houses are like it's like a trailer park sort of area, and you know the community is semi-permanent. It became fully permanent, but it has some issues with potentially being washed away. It's had a couple of times where there's been some massive floods that they've had to evacuate the entire community, and so we could call this an area of concern. We name this the never sink community flooding, and we could talk while the conversation's going on with the community. They could tell us specifics about how much damage they've occurred here, what the sort of anecdotal information is about that, et cetera. And then when we save that zone, it becomes something that we can do a couple different things with. The first of which is we can utilize this zone in some of our other places on the front end of the tool. So this zone could show up on a map that's populated with areas of concern, if that's one of our maps on the front. I know we have one right now on the front of the public side of the plan where it's showing development areas. So if they told us that maybe this is a development zone and we labeled it as such, it would show up directly onto the map as a development zone with those notes associated with it. And then we can also, in developing our actions, our strategies, we can include this zone as a location for that strategy. So we can start keeping track of strategies in a way that is mappable. And so if you have any connection with previous hazard mitigation planning, the paper documents, typically they have tables of strategies, and the closest thing you have to a location for mapping purposes is the name of the address or the name of the bridge number or something along those lines. And so this is a step in a direction of potentially being able to have direct locations associated with actions for tracking going forward. And it's still in its infancy as we're pilot testing, trying to figure out exactly how best to do all of that stuff. But then if you wanted to find out more information about, so I just drew this zone on the map. It shows up over here on the right, and we can then open this for our community, for our conversation, and just take a look at what we have in this community. So there's 122 total buildings in here at $2.94 million worth of value that is in this 2% 500-year floodplain. And interestingly, they're commercial. It's probably because it's owned by a commercial entity might own the entire land. I'm not sure exactly, but these are types of things we would tease out in the interview process. And if we change this, the map to being the 1%, take another look at this, we have, there's more buildings that show up here, 236 with a $5.69 million valuation. And that's just in the zone that I drew. So, so that's another a use to the tool that's really interesting. There's a couple of different zone types that we track for the mitigation planning, and we can always add new zones that we track this way. And it's interesting right now where we're using it mostly for risk, but you could imagine using this to see, if you wanted to draw a zone in like a city and you wanted to really quickly see how many buildings of what type are there, et cetera. you could imagine that being a useful thing, right? And additionally, we can then click through to see the exact addresses of those communities, the assets that we've brought into the table. And there's some amount of editing that we do during the calls, just to get, there's more information in our asset database than is in the that we can provide additional information, I guess is the way of putting it. So if this was a critical infrastructure, we could talk about what kind of critical infrastructure it is. Is this a shelter? And then if we click yes, we have information that we can provide about evacuation capacity and ADA compliance, et cetera. And so that then all gets saved as part of that asset during the phone call, the interview, so that we then populate the shelters data table that way, populating information about critical infrastructure that way. And we include things like, does the critical infrastructure have emergency backup power generation? And that's a great way to fill in the gaps about what the community has in terms of capacity, et cetera. Start planning some actions. So, for one of the things in FEMA hazard mitigation planning is that all critical infrastructure, really should have backup power generation. And so putting that type of information into a hazard mitigation plan makes that strategy fundable by FEMA mitigation funding at a future date. So having a cache of actions and strategies in your hazard mitigation plan turns into potential for FEMA funding to get those projects completed in the future. And as we're finding out in Fulton County, when we talk with them about some of their issues after the Halloween storm in last year, a year ago, almost exactly, they had a number of like road repairs that were conducted via FEMA, via the public assistance funding mechanism, which is which handles like public infrastructure after an event. But because they didn't have a plan in place that showed that they wanted to mitigate some of the issues. So a lot of times mitigation, if you wanted to upsize a culvert, it costs a little bit more to have an upsized culvert versus replacing the culvert to pre-storm conditions. And having that in your plan, that your intention was to upsize that culvert, allows FEMA to come through and provide more funding to make that mitigated rebuild. So this is a thing that it's important to have each and every piece in the plan. And one other thing that we've found in this process that we're doing is that tracking these actions is just a really important thing across different planning mechanisms. Like we're talking a lot now with our communities about how your actions, your strategies for hazard mitigation, how they show up in your highway management plans, how they show up in your comprehensive plans, how they show up in, some folks have like climate action plans. And some of these hazard mitigation actions can be also those other types of actions, right? And additionally, are the actions that you have in your climate action plan or your open space plan, are any of those applicable to hazard mitigation planning? And let's bring those in here. It's really showing that having a nice inventory of strategies, I think it pays off to have a really structured set of strategies for a community. And like one of the things we've noticed is that, if you trace back through time, all of the hazard mitigation plans for a given community, the law was written in 2000. The first round of hazard mitigation plans created a number of strategies and people were able to, focus on a couple of issues in their community. The next time they had to do an update, which was with, a 5-year turnaround, the inventory grew a little bit through the process, so each time you do this planning process, your inventory of strategies grows. Some of those get retired because the projects were completed and they were mitigated and they are no longer an issue. But a lot of them don't get completed, and that just adds to our knowledge base that we carry forward. and again, integrating it into all the different types of planning projects. So what we're hoping that this back end that we're developing here with the scenario mapping tool and the strategy collection mechanisms, and again, I know Erica showed this before, but it's just worth seeing how many strategies we have for instance, in Sullivan County. We have 217 right now. And again, these are brought forward from the previous plan. There's update statuses associated with them. We can view the information about them and see just how much information we have, how much we don't have. And maybe in the next round of planning, you don't have to fill out as much of the high level details, but what you can really get down to are the lower level details and flesh this out further. Additionally, these high level details do give you a pretty good start for an application to a FEMA funded mechanism. So the idea here is really to take that canvas of the scenario tools, which really was the centerpiece of most of our conversation in these interview processes. Take this as the canvas. And I didn't even show you that we can draw evacuation routes on here, but there's a couple of different tools within this. You can just drop comments on the map if you want to. Just say, here's a spot that we want to comment about. I don't know if it's an area of concern or whatever. It's just a place that we should note. We can come back to later. We can look at census information, such as we have a vulnerable demographics map here. We have information about hazards that we can throw on this map as well. During our conversation, we do all these things, and it allows for like a palette for taking the risk assessment and bringing in the problem statement process and bringing, sort of as the springboard towards strategy development. So I think that covers what I wanted to cover on the scenario tools and sort of how that brings everything together here. And Dr. Lawson, I think that you would be next in line here for bringing the whole story together.
Yes, thank you, Eric. I always enjoy watching the scenario tools in action. It really is it makes planning just spring to life. But when we think about what this is accomplishing and we look towards the future, perhaps the decade of the 2020s is going to be remembered as the era when hazard mitigation planning becomes the backbone of the planning profession, because we're facing so many challenges now with climate change and natural hazard impacts on the built environment and our communities. And while in previous decades, we've seen the evolution of a number of new planning realms that sometimes operate in isolation from each other with individual planning goals and objectives, the emergence of this agile data and the applied data science hazard mitigation plans and supporting data that we've been showing to you today could hold the key to truly addressing resilience planning with a cohesive and an integrated way forward. Now, hazard mitigation planning also ties to FEMA's Community Lifelines initiative, which, for those of you that are familiar with this, it focuses on stabilizing our communities after an impactful hazard event with the goal of returning our communities to their pre-event state or even better. Now, at the same time, as planners, most local, regional, and state planners are doing their day-to-day planning tasks. And by making this linkage, as Eric has just talked about, it will ensure that our communities actively investigate the hazards their communities might experience while they're doing their day-to-day work. So, for example, they can identify and understand the impacts on vulnerable populations and structures, evaluate the risks, inventory capabilities, and develop strategies to mitigate hazard impacts, including cascading impacts, while doing these other types of planning through a shared integrated platform and to promote dialogues with our different planning colleagues. Now, for example, here's a way of thinking about this. What if we were incorporating transit agencies in evacuation planning while they were simultaneously considering an initiative to expand their fleets to include electric buses? Now, recently, the transit industry has also been experiencing the benefits of data-forward approaches with many new forms of transit data and tools. So what that makes possible is we can combine these two data streams and inform planning efforts on the sites for the charging stations or the power storage locations so they can be strategically located to accommodate good day travel and at the same time bad day travel along the lifeline corridors. In addition, general transit feed specifications, which is that GTFS that we use to make it possible on our smartphones to guide transit riders on their apps, that function in the apps could include evacuation routing for the agencies and the traveling public, with an integrated planning strategy to develop and disseminate rerouting plans to avoid street segments that are expected to be flooding during a microburst, which is a type of weather event we now have to deal with, and especially where there's currently culvert issues that we've identified. Now, at the same time, the hazard mitigation actions could then incorporate the routing needs of transit while requesting funding to cure those culvert failures. So we kind of get both sides of the picture for our day-to-day planning and for hazard planning. And by looking towards a future where we do both at the same time, it makes it possible to have a more supported, integrated planning strategy for our communities. Now, the data forward approach can be expanded to a national planning effort. And Eric, do you have the ability to share the Cooperating Technical Partners project funded by FEMA that we launched on Monday? Are we able to put that back up?
Sure thing.
So while he's getting that ready, this is an effort to use a number of the data forward techniques we've developed here in New York for state and local hazard mitigation plans and apply them nationally. So Eric, take it away here.
Right, yeah. And so this is sort of the flip side of what we had done for, this is going to take a second to load here. But the flip side of what we had done for the state plan was that the work that we did to process the storm events data as part of the state hazard mitigation plan update in 2018, 2019, that data really it telescopes well down to the county level, which is sort of the backbone for the hazards page that you saw earlier. I'm just going to re-show you that real quick. But it's the backbone for all of this information here about hazards of concern, which you then see down here, the backbone for these different tables and et cetera. So that data also telescopes nicely up, right? So if you want to look at it at the state level, you want to look at the national level, right? And so this allows us to look across the entire country at this data. We've also done the same processing here that we did. If anyone has ever tried to play around with the storm events data, it's somewhat complicated. There's a lot of different subtypes of weather events. There's a bit in part of the data is to track these damage loss associated with big events, but part of it also is to track odd anomalies and high temperatures and various interesting weather events that may not cause any damage whatsoever. So there's some grouping that we do. It's all in our methodology, but we've grouped it into these categories based on review of the national risk, what was it called? The National Risk Index, which is FEMA. FEMA has not put it out, but we were a part of helping them figure out how to organize all this stuff. And they've done some work with many experts at, in different fields of weather, and we're able to come up with this grouping of hazards. So we've processed the national database from NOAA of storm events that is now available in this mapping tool, which really I think the most important piece of is this ability to download, right? Because one of the lead hazard data products out there is called Sheldis or Shieldis. If folks are aware of that, they do some of the similar processing of the NOAA data, as well as some other data sources to create their damage, weather events damage and natural hazard events damage data set. And this is a somewhat similar product. And this one, is just available for anybody publicly who wants to pull this stuff. So we could take any place in New York State. We could select a county, and we could download pretty quickly by municipality or by tract information about all of the hazards listed there, or if we just wanted to choose flooding, for instance, we can export that data. So we've also made available the Sba Hazard Loans data. Really what this entire project with the CTP program, the Cooperating Technical Partners Program with FEMA, the point of this project is to really get to the heart of what is the damage associated with a disaster. And you all see these numbers. We hear numbers from a lot of different folks about how much damages were associated with, for instance, like Sandy, et cetera. And it's interesting when you really dive into it that it's a much more complicated issue, right? And so we have the NOAA information, we have the SBA hazard loans. These are loans that people are allowed to take out for things that are not covered by FEMA via the Small Business Administration. So there's some information there. FEMA has its own information about disasters, and this is a deep well that we've dove into. And it's not quite done yet, but we're analyzing and collecting together the public assistance, the individual assistance, the hazard mitigation data, and everything to create one large number for the FEMA disasters. So if it was a disaster declaration, we can create a number that is associated with those things. And so we're still not at the point where we really understand if that plus the SBA data would be a total number for a disaster, or how really we're gonna get to that point of what constitutes the total number for a disaster. And so at that, as we pull forward this project over the next year or so, we'll know a lot better. And all of that data will then be available for download and use in hazard mitigation planning. So whether you're using the tools we showed earlier or not, you would be able to download the data associated with it for your own use offline for making any sort of tables, et cetera. And I don't think we currently have a shapefile version of download. We only have CSV, but I think that might be something that we end up providing as well, because there is sometimes there is location information associated with a couple of the different kinds of hazards. So that's something that we've talked about as well.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Well, so just as you were mentioning, over time, another aspect of using a data-forward approach is the ability to evaluate the effectiveness of our hazard mitigation projects by actually having those real costs and benefits, by having, especially at the local level, having the real data generated through the monitoring of the hazard mitigation projects. Because this being a dynamic platform, once you put the information in and can modify it as bids come in and work gets completed, and we have the actual costs associated with building out the project, we then can have the opportunity to measure the resulting property damage costs avoided when the project is completed, so that you can see those. If we put in a mitigation that keeps the flooding from infiltrating the school properties, then that's going to be damage cost avoided. That's something that can be calculated and shared. And the underlying data is embedded in the hazard mitigation tools, along with the analysis and the processing. So the information can be shared with decision makers to inform their future decisions on the most cost-effective techniques demonstrated with the best results. So a new form of digital case studies. And the data-forward approach has several other advantages over traditional paper plans. So while everyone is getting used to having public-facing plans that are on a website in a PDF form, having one of these data-forward tools with the back-end functions for planners, it makes it possible to conduct some specialized analyses with the very granular data. And it also makes it possible to have the special feature of evaluating the plan itself. So for example, to assist the FEMA staff with their review and evaluation of any hazard mitigation plan, remember, you need to have an approved plan to get that funding after you've done your update. There's a special representation of the plan that directly associates with the required plan elements that FEMA uses to determine your compliance through a special filtering feature. And this feature has the potential for other planning realms. For example, using the web-based planning platform will make it possible for the desired evaluation criteria for your community to be built into a special feature tool to assist the evaluators. And at the same time, one of the features I like is that the evaluators can communicate through the comments section of the tool back with identified gaps or suggestions they have for improvements noted in the existing tool, even as the plan is being written. So we are simultaneously being able to have the FEMA team participate as we're constructing these plans in real time. Now, I often think about other ways that planners could leverage the opportunity to have these data forward tools in their areas of planning. The key is being able to turn the information into machine readable data points, as Adam was pointing out in the beginning of our presentation here. And this is a serious and thoughtful part of our work on this project. We have to be able to turn the information that's in a narrative format into machine readable data that the applied data scientists can use to build the agile data tools that are needed for this effort. And we need to have the planning community join us in developing this technique of converting narrative descriptions into complete machine readable data. Now, this is a time-intensive step that has to be completed, but it opens up many future uses of the data. It's highly scalable for any time frame or any geographic representation when those necessary elements are identified. So we could have opportunities to create playbooks for sharing the strategies that would propel planning tasks to these agile data services, and there would be large benefits for the planning world. And we've been doing this in transportation and finding that there really is a benefit to making it possible to use your data in this new way. And to the greatest extent, most planners do recognize that standardized data accelerates this process. However, trying to establish data standards can be exhausting. And here, applied data science can assist by using translation software that uses artificial intelligence to harmonize the data sets with other data sets. We have a demonstration of that with the MTA, and it really is opening up some opportunities where we just can't get our data format to be generalized across all of our planning communities. So we use these applied data science tools to help us with that. So where are we going now? Well, the framework for the software has been developed for our local hazard mitigation planning. We currently have these 4 pilot test counties underway: Delaware, Sullivan, Hamilton, and Fulton. But the base case tools are also available for every county in New York State as we go forward. We're building this out with that universal approach. So you can access any county by just using in the URL the name of the county .mitigateny.org, and what you'll get are those base case data polls that make it possible to see what we have in what the tools can do to make that data available for analysis. Now, the customized text and the planning analysis still needs to be completed by professionals and shared with the public and all the rest of the aspects of planning. But everybody gets to start with a great deal of information for hazard mitigation planning, as well as Eric pointed out, other types of planning. For example, open space and floodplain plans, and a number of different ways that the underlying data that is now available through the tool functions can inform so many different realms of planning. So in addition to the benefits of this base case, for each county, you also have the ability to aggregate adjacent counties for a regional planning task. And in fact, that CTP national tool, you can actually do multi-state planning efforts using data from adjacent states and even their counties. And we know that our watersheds don't like to stay within the boundaries that we've designated. They have other plans. And so making it possible to have this further reach of geographies make it a really incredible way to get data to give us the information we need to share with our decision makers. And even the data at the census level track outside of the state and the national tool can inform our planning efforts as well. So on behalf of our AVAIL team, we greatly appreciate having this opportunity to share our progress and look forward to your questions and suggestions for future features.
And I want to make one clarification too, that we do not currently have all of the other counties in New York set up for this capacity. It does take a little bit of work for us to do, but that's something that is the intention of the whole program. It probably won't happen until after we finish the hazard mitigation planning processes in those 4 counties. So sometime next year is when you can expect that to come online. There was a question. I have a 1 o'clock presentation for one of those hazard mitigation meetings, so I'm going to be jumping off the call right now. I just wanted to answer the question about the update to the data. This data was created in 2018. We're using the 2018 parcel data. It is something that can be updated. It is a little bit labor intensive, so we're not going to update it every year. It will be updated for the next hazard mitigation plan update, probably in 2022 or 2023. But it is available, now through the tools. It will be available to, I think, in every county coming up soon. Like I said, next year. And there was another question I saw that I should address as well. How many people? Oh, yeah. And I think the second question about how many people were interviewed. Oh yeah, this one here. Does the building footprint include year built? And the answer is in some cases it does, in most cases it doesn't. So we had hoped that we could use that to do some level of what codes it was built to as part of mitigation, risk assessment, but it's not necessarily something that can be utilized for that. And so that other question that was asked there, I think the rest of my team can handle in my absence. So thank you all. I'm going to jump off here for my other call.
Thanks, Eric. And anyone who works with me knows that I always see our future uses of the tools and like to talk about them now. But the project will be going on after we complete the 4 pilot studies, and then we will be spending some time writing it up as a report and doing the final approaches to making it universalized.
And to answer the question about how many people we interviewed, we had the planning team was split into 2 teams, and we each interviewed about around 20 to 23 jurisdictional representatives between the 2 counties, Delaware and Sullivan County. So as a collective, we did about 42 interviews over the between the summer months, and it was an extensive process. We had a kind of a what's the word? Not a script, but we had a specific set of questions that we needed to get through in order to obtain the data we needed to enter. So the interviews were, about 2 hours each. That raw information, I don't believe is available to the public. And if by raw information, that means the information discussed in our interviews, that will be put into the tool suite. So.
Fantastic. Do we have any other questions? I think there was one in the chat box that got put in there by accident. I'll read it off to you guys. They're asking what challenges are you seeing in terms of making this approach a reality for local leadership, and what are the opportunities? Or I guess the approach that they're mentioning is seeing the potential as a whole new approach to the planning dynamic, planning for dynamic plans versus static plans. So what are the challenges you're seeing in terms of making this approach a reality for local leadership, and what are the opportunities?
Well,
know,
I'll take Adam, go ahead, and then I'll add some to it.
Sure. I'll start us off by just saying that, I absolutely think that this is extensible to all planning processes, and not just the hazard mitigation plannings and hazard mitigation planning specifically. One of the major challenges that I know that I've faced in my interviews with jurisdictions is a technological barrier where this information, these tools they're digital tools, they're data oriented, and it can be overwhelming for some people who aren't well versed in computers or technology in general. And so, there's definitely a challenge of how do we put this in the hands of the capable practitioners in our communities to give them the opportunity to plan for their communities.
And I'll add that we had the additional challenge of COVID coming to our country at the time that we were getting ready to go out and do the interviewing process and holding the public meetings. And so we found that in the cooperating communities that we provided access through these tools. And then we also did some hybrid plans where we had a representative on site to be able to work with the folks that were there socially distanced. But then we also have the opportunity to use these tools. And with Zoom, all of us are becoming Zoom experts. We have the ability to have the breakout rooms. And we found that using the breakout rooms, when we had lots of different questions and folks who had different expertise to help us, we could break out into those rooms and really get down to using the scenario tools and getting lots of pieces understood and then coming back together. So it would be a learning experience for us that perhaps using the technologies, the Zoom technologies, might be one of the better ways to do these types of tool uses, recognizing that we have parts of our community where it's not appropriate. So we really, I think, have had some lessons learned on how to do both and combine the information together, because the ability to see the tools and work with the tools really gave us some incredible new insights as to what the problems were. But at the same time, we had community members that needed to come and be able to share that information in person. So we'll be writing up those experiences in the final report. But I think we always do have to be sensitive to how can we make sure that we're getting an equitable opportunity for all of our decision makers who also can be technologically challenged, as well as our public to be able to participate.
Okay, we do have another question. Is inflation factored into the cost estimates?
I would have to ask our software development team. I don't know that off the top of my head.
And I would say at this point, that is certainly possible to do, as well as net presence capabilities. We also build transportation analysis tools that have far more depth in taking the data and manipulating it, doing equations, and then we do speeds and congestion and a lot of other things that regular hazard mitigation has not really been able to perform in the plan itself. So for example, the equations you use for your cost estimates and your inflation factors, that hasn't been done yet because we're not at that point, but there certainly is the capability to do that. And it also provides for the ability to share the methodology that you use for your inflation factors to do your cost estimates would go right into that methodology a menu, so that people could determine whether the way we were calculating it was the way they would like to calculate it. And we can also offer, just like we have several different versions of the flood consequences, you could have several different cost estimate inflation factors and be able to do a sensitivity analysis to see one approach or an approach with different factors applied, so that we give our decision makers the best set of costs. So it's not, it doesn't have to be hardwired. We can add that flexibility. And in fact, in some of our tools, we allow the users to put the factors that they would like into it, and then get the calculation from that. So right now, we haven't addressed that, but as Adam said, we have discussions with our data scientists on a regular hourly basis, and we can definitely make sure that that is addressed. So we'll know what the capabilities are for the tool to do that.
Great. We do have another question now. Do any of your data layers include local zoning districts?
I'll take a stab at that one. The answer is not in their shared form. So what we're using for the land use indicators is coming right from the assessor's property codes in the tax parcel data. It is certainly possible, and we've had conversations about drawing those local zoning districts in using the tools that you can draw. But my preference would be that a future feature would be that we could just ingest the local zoning districts and make that information interactive. And this is where we see so much flexibility in the tool for comprehensive plans and overlay zones, with all kinds of opportunities for our day-to-day planning to be a layer that then can be ingested. But those kinds of ideas, we definitely want to hear from the planning community so that those can be considered as part of the tools. At the same time, as Eric was pointing out, we are looking to be able to provide the data as an export, as a shapefile, and then in your own office, you can take the shapefile of what the information is from the tool and combine it yourself with your local zoning districts. And especially if you're doing a zoning update and you think that the boundaries will be changing, that would be an excellent way to use the hazard data as the base layer, and then do your strategies for your zoning changes, or just looking at how your zoning either is conflicting with some of the things that need to happen in the hazard zone, or can be strengthened by some of the things in the hazard zone. So that's a very good idea. But currently, because we need to have the universality of the incoming data to do the data tool analysis, we use the parcel data because it's all uniform data format.
Great. Is there any more questions that people would like to ask? Give a couple seconds. Oh, got one. Next question, when will you be integrating more GIS shapefiles?
Well, again, we lost Eric. He had to go take care of a planning meeting right now with the hazard mitigation. At this point, it's going the other direction. So we're going to make it possible to take the data out of the tools and integrate it with your GIS shapefiles. But it's fairly simple for the data team to be able to ingest GIS files. So it would depend on what we do next with the future features. It is not difficult to do from a technical standpoint, but one of the things that's important for the tool concept for the data forward approach is to make sure that what we're putting in is universally available for all the users. So we use the census GIS, we use the parcel GIS, we use the national sources for the weather. So the issue for us is when we have very localized GIS shapefiles, at this point, it's easier for the people who are trying to do the analysis to do it on their local computing resources, but it's possible to go the other way. But we need to figure out the best way to have the tools provide the same functions for all the tool users.
Okay. Next question. Once you complete the four pilot counties that you're doing currently, will you be doing other counties?
We would like to, at this point, the contract is the 4 pilot studies. And again, the pilot is to help the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services be able to, at the state level, have more ability to understand what's happening at the local level. And we will be, as soon as the 4 counties are completed, then we're going to be integrating all of that data into an updated version of the state plan. And at that time, as Eric was pointing out, and I kind of jumped the gun here, at that point, we'll be looking at how much all of the rest of the counties can provide information. But we don't have any immediate plans to take on more counties, but we're looking to be able to make every county at least able to have the base information that can be used by counties or other planners.
Fantastic. Anybody have any more questions? Give you a couple seconds. Doesn't seem like it though. Okay. Well, with that being said, I'd like to thank you all for coming, for joining us for our session today. I'd like to thank all the presenters, Dr. Lawson, Adam, Eric, and Erica. You did a wonderful job. I would like to say thank you also to Sandy for co-hosting me today. It was a fun time, and I just want to point out that our next session is going to be November 5th, tomorrow, Thursday at 3 p.m. And the session is titled Optimizing Online Public Engagement to Support Your Planning. So I hope you all had a fun time listening to this session, and I hope we see you again at the rest of the conference. And everybody have a good day. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.